Which one of history's good guys was actually a horrible person? It's my estimation that every man ever got a statue made of him was one kinda some or another, Captain Tightpants. Alexander Graham Bell pushed for the eugenics of deaf and hard of hearing people and was a major obstacle to fund schools for the deaf, which thankfully did persist despite this shat. Also, Helen Keller was a super eugenicist, not joking either. So I learned recently that Coco Chanel of Chanel No. 5 was very anti-Semitic and eventually became a Nazi spy. On the flip side of finer scents, Christian Dior created a perfume after his sister who was a member of the French Resistance. Rudyard Kipling, author of The Jungle Book, paraphrasing, "The only way to keep the yellow man out is to bring the white man in." Also got his son killed by using his influence to get him into the army despite his son's poor eyesight. Bit of a dong move if you ask me. Not necessarily a good guy, but got lots of positive attention from the release of The Greatest Showman. Apparently P.T. Barnum was a terrible person in real life. The Greatest Showman is a film P.T. Barnum would release about himself. While he almost certainly wasn't the first to say it, Lord Acton once observed that great men are almost always bad men. Pluck any great man from history, those rare figures about whom the story of the human race seems to turn, and you find a monster who changed the world, probably without even intending to do so. Tinkerbell. Everybody thinks she was so cute and such a good friend to Peter, but she was a jealous psychopath and tried to murder Wendy several times. I mean, in the book she only did it once. Ned Kelly is neat, because he seems to have recognized his anti-hero status. His actions were never morally right, but it's hard to say we haven't ever wanted to do the same. IDK, I feel like a lot of Ned Kelly's actions were justified if you take his accounts as opposed to the policeman he dealt with. The truth is likely somewhere in between. There's no excuse for his early theft, but those wouldn't make him a horrible person by today's standards. Since most have been covered, I'll do a guy who was a true freaking villain who turned into kind of a decent guy. It doesn't nearly wipe the slate clean, but it's an interesting historical transformation. Nathan Bedford Forrest, slave trader, Confederate general, likely war criminal, first Grand Wizard of the Klan. In later years, Forrest expressed regret at his life's work. He began publicly advocating for former slaves to receive better treatment, including their ability to enter into higher education. He attempted to act upon his shame by petitioning President Grant to allow him to put down the KKK by force. On a similar note, George Wallace, Alabama governor, Mr. Segregation Today, Segregation Tomorrow, Segregation Forever, later announced his racism, appointed record numbers of African American to state positions, and personally asked black leaders for forgiveness. When he ran for a final term as governor in 1982, he won with 90% of the black vote. There's a statue of Oliver Cromwell in London. Loads of movies about him and how he was a brave revolutionary. Nah, frick that. He was an evil sociopath who committed genocide on Irish Catholics and turned the UK into a Puritan dictatorship. See band Christmas in Dancing. Miserable prick. A shorter list would be which of history's good guys were truly good guys and not later found out to be completed $$ holes. Charlie Chaplin. He got married to a 15-year-old girl because he got her pregnant when she was 14. He was openly pedophile and, from what I've read, quite an butthole. Apparently, he and Marlon Brando worked together later on and Charlie was such an uptight butthole that Marlon Brando, of all people, had to tell him to chill the heck out. Brando, for what it's worth, is infamous for demanding ridiculous concessions from directors for his performances, refusing to learn his lines, and a number of other things. This is a little more niche, but Bill Wilson, the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, the guy did great things, and created a program of recovery that has saved millions of lives since its inception 85 years ago. He was also an arrogant butthole that cheated on his wife even in sobriety. Nothing is black and white, it seems. Alexander Graham Bell. This man did not invent the telephone. Several people were working on similar technology at the same time. Antonio Meucci invented it first. but there was a court case over who got the patent rights. Nucci died before the case was settled, and Graham Bell won the glory he didn't deserve. Tony Soprano knew this and went ape crap over it at the dinner table. In some aspects to the 60s and 70s when the Beatles were icons. I'm talking about John Lennon. People who use his image and face for peace sometimes forget important details. He abused women. He was a cheater. He abused his children. Made one go completely deaf in one ear. Total hypocrite on the no possessions when he lived one of the most lavish lifestyles of his time. Compulsive liar. Had a sexual appetite for his own mother. Almost killed a few people. Look up Bob Wooler. He was almost punched to death by John. There were others, but their stories have either been disputed or unclaimed. So whenever I see a bunch of people sing Imagine, I just shake my head in shame, cause so many people don't even know how bad he was but act like he was a son. As a massive Beatles fanatic, when I come across people who say that John is this symbol of peace, I always remind them of this. You cannot be a true fan of something, someone, and not criticize it, and all of the other Beatles would come before John in this regard. IDK man. When I read about Martin Luther last year, I thought he was kinda cool as he created the Protestant branch of Christianity, but I recently read about what he thought of Jews, and yikes. For those of you who don't know, he got P when the Jews didn't want to convert to his religion and started being anti-Semitic as frick. He wrote a whole book on Jews and their lies and said that he urged others to burn down synagogues to prove their loyalty to Christianity. He also wanted the Jewish prayer books to be taken away from them. Most of southern Germany remained Catholic because of a pamphlet he published entitled Against the Murderous, Thieving Hordes of Peasants after a peasant revolt trying to reduce the taxes on their fields. Depends on what you mean. Judging by today's standards, I'd say most historical good guys were horrible people. Judging by the standards of their era, things become more complicated. Yeah, even abolitionists back in the day may have been against slavery, but that didn't mean they thought blacks should be treated equally. Sir John A. Macdonald, first Prime Minister of Canada, did a lot for the country in its infancy but treated indigenous people like garbage. John Lennon. He is basically portrayed as the selfless angel of the hippie movement, but the more you look into his life, his actions, and how he treated other people close to him, you will quickly realize he is what some people would call a terrible human being. Joseph P. Kennedy, dad of John, Bobby, and Teddy, had one of his daughters lobotomized. She was likely autistic but was considered an embarrassment to the family. Rosemary Kennedy was never considered autistic. When her mother, Rose Kennedy, was giving birth to Rosemary, the doctor wasn't available, and Rose was told to keep her legs closed until the doctor arrived. Baby Rosemary was in the birth canal for about 2 hours, being deprived of oxygen the whole time, which resulted in severe learning disabilities. Napoleon. I'm French and I don't get why people like him so freaking much here. He re-established slavery and tried to conquer a huge part of Europe, leaving literal bloodbaths behind him. Gosh, even the painting of his coronation reeks of narcissism. He's putting the crown on his own head for FCK's sake. Putting a crown on your own head really makes the most sense for a conqueror. By allowing someone else to put the crown on your head, you are saying that someone else has power over you. It makes sense in most monarchies where they have the whole divine right to rule and are crowned by the leader of the church. But a military conqueror crowns himself. Teddy Roosevelt. Interesting quote of his. I don't go so far as to think that the only good Indians are the dead Indians, but I believe 9 out of every 10 are. Thomas Edison. Biggest monopolist ever and took credit for other people's work. He didn't invent the light bulb but bought the rights and advanced it. He monopolized the film projector and most films at the time, and it took a very long lawsuit to get that fixed. He took many creations from his employees and put his name on it. This wasn't illegal because of the contracts employees signed at the time, but it's not exactly a sign of goodwill. I don't hate the guy, but his character is often completely exaggerated. Elvis Presley. He never wrote a song in his life, but his record label made any songwriters hand over half of their writing fees before Elvis would record their songs. He's credited as a co-writer on the majority of his songs. That's why Dolly Parton refused to let him record I Will Always Love You. She wouldn't sign away any of the songwriting credit or future profits from her work. She's a savvy businesswoman. Most people who are good are just powerless. Most people are complicated, and if they're in a position where they can get away with it, will do both good and bad things. The more you do, the more things can turn badly. Leaders have to do tough decisions and they get recorded. Most of them. I don't know about other countries, but in America schools tend to put historical figures on high pedestals. It would be better to be upfront about how people did good things and terrible things. I think one of the prime examples of someone who did both good and horrible things is Thomas Jefferson. We basically have him to thank for some of the most important freedoms enshrined in the Constitution, most specifically freedom of religion and a secular government. But even though he wrote the words "all men are created equal," he owned slaves and raped one of them. Charlemagne. He slaughtered a ridiculous amount of Saxon people for not converting to Christianity. He is also known for destroying pagan shrines and groves, when in reality he was just showing up to unguarded holy places, taking all the trinkets and offerings people had left and then burned them down. I've never seen anyone call Charlemagne a good man, just that he's one of the greatest of the Christian conquerors of the medieval era. His actions echoed well into the 20th century. Main takeaway: we like to categorize people into good and bad boxes, when in reality most people are a blend of both. Even the best people are not 100% clean. Anyone on the receiving end of anyone's greatness probably would claim that champion or hero or ruler or king or general or explorer was a total scumbag. Young Gandhi was racist. 2 random quotes from him. General belief seems to prevail in the colony that the Indians are a little better, if at all, than savages or the natives of Africa. About the mixing of the Kaffirs with the Indians, I must confess I feel most strongly. He sounds like a racist Yoda. Dwight Eisenhower, one of America's more popular presidents. His domestic policy was okay, but his foreign policy was a disaster whose repercussions continue to resonate today. He organized CIA plots to overthrow democratic governments in Guatemala and Iran, insisting he was protecting these regions from communist incursion when in fact the autocratic regimes installed primarily protected the commercial interests of the United Fruit Company and British Petroleum. He refused to accept the legitimacy of UN, brokered elections in Vietnam, nullifying the democratic process and installing a brutal dictator instead, resulting eventually in the US-Vietnam War, when the revolution organized by Guevara and Castro overthrew the corrupt Batista regime. Eisenhower gave in to pressure from commercial interests and refused to aid the new government, forcing them to turn to the Soviet Union for help. He then organized the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion, which was not launched until after Kennedy was elected, but the planning and organization was pure Eisenhower. The Cuban Missile Crisis resulted directly from Eisenhower's policies. He can also be blamed for nurturing the career of his vice president Richard Nixon, who would become one of the most loathed politicians in US history. Very true. People now give him praise for his military-industrial complex speech, but everything he did actively aided in it developing in the first place. Albert Speer, the good Nazi, constructed an elaborate narrative that he didn't know about the Holocaust, concentration camps, or slavery when he was the Minister of War Production, which was intimately involved in all 3 of those things. Due to him being an extremely effective liar, he wasn't called out on his bulls until after he died, when the historical narrative was scrutinized. Albert Speer is not regarded positively here in Germany. If you wanna go after good Nazis, Stauffenberg and especially Erwin Rommel have been way worse than their today's standing. FDR gets a lot of credit for steering the US through the Great Depression and World War II, but committed one of the greatest violations of people's rights in US history when he interned tons of Japanese Americans. The amount of people who either don't know or never learned about the Japanese internment camps is ridiculous. Bob Marley, and there's a very good story to back this up that also explains how he grew to be #1 reggae singer of Jamaica. He had a posse of friends that would intimidate radio networks of Jamaica into playing his music, as well as destroying the alpha discs of other newer artists. IDKWTF they're called, but the copy the radio networks were given in order to play on the air. He might have been trying to promote feel-good music and peace and all that, but he was a thug when it came to getting that music out, and at the same time gave a dude songwriting credit so that he'd get royalties from the music and be able to keep his soup kitchen open. People are so weird. Bully one guy, help another, rape his wife, help a guy keep his soup kitchen open. Frick. Goes to show how complicated people are. Idolize ideals, not people. This is how cults of personality get so gnarly. People refuse to acknowledge traits actions inconsistent with their image of the person. Eventually they just cling onto a fictional image so they don't have to reevaluate their beliefs. This also reminds me a bit of never meet your heroes. Because once you meet them, you realize that they are human and flawed just like yourself. Had this happen to me once, it was not cool. This is exactly why I think everyone should meet their heroes. The truth is that the world isn't divided into heroes and villains. It's full of people just like you and me, most of whom are trying to do the best that they can. Yes, there are extraordinary people, but even they are human and make mistakes, get angry, have bad days, yell at their kids' spouses. The more we learn to see each other as people, the better able we are to understand and love one another, and build a better society together. We overcome our human faults not through force of will, but through understanding. Humans are genetically the same as when we wandered through forests and tundra. What's changed is our understanding of who we are and how the world we belong to works. Understanding is everything. Ignorance always leads to more darkness. In the end. Emo. Anyway. Astronomer here. This is a hard one to admit because I definitely loved his book and idolized his antics a bit when I was a young physics major, but Richard Feynman. A lot of people read Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, and share my reaction, and his physics lectures are amazing, but the older I get and the more people I meet who knew him, holy crap. The guy was beyond just times were different levels of misogyny against women. He committed domestic violence against his wife, kept lying to undergrads when he was in Cornell that he wasn't a professor so he could sleep with him, and, rumor has it, had to leave Cornell for Caltech because he slept with other faculty members' wives, and I've definitely heard a ton about him trying to pick up other scientists at physics conferences to know he was considered a creep. To be clear, I think someone can do good science and be an awful person, but that's not what OP was asking. Also, anyone who has been around a physics department knows that casual sexist jokes and the like are still not that uncommon today, and the fact that physics keeps idolizing Feynman probably doesn't help in changing the culture. Feynman was renowned for sitting in strip clubs and drawing nudes of the dancers in his off time. I've been reading an autobiography of Dyson Freeman who spent time with RF, traveled and road trips. Richard was a womanizer after his wife died. He had a reputation as a doting husband during his marriage and during his wife's illness. After her death, though, genius, intellect and carouser. Tinkerbell. Everybody thinks she was so cute and such a good friend to Peter, but she was a jealous psychopath and tried to murder Wendy several times. You really have to wonder what happened to Tinkerbell between the new CG movies and Peter Pan. What do you mean? Well, you've seen the newer Tinkerbell movies. She has a little bit of a temper, but otherwise she's a pretty sweet-hearted fairy, and she lives with all of the other fairies. Then, in Peter Pan, she's the only fairy you see, and she's more interested in being with Peter. Not only that, but she tries on more than one occasion to murder Wendy, and when called out on it, she shows no remorse. Ice cold. Clearly something horrific went down in Pixie Hollow, and Tink is either the cause, or just the sole survivor. Good lord. So Peter Pan is actually a grim post-apocalyptic tale, yes. Alfred Hitchcock was a butthole sexual predator. Tippi Hedren wrote about it in her memoir. She did say he was a brilliant film marker, so you can be both. Yo, Hitchcock is so fricked up. He was famous for pulling pranks like chaining a dude up over a long night and giving him a bottle of whiskey laced with serious laxatives, so he shat himself, painfully, in chains, for 12 hours or so. He made the actress from Psycho, Janet Leigh, stand in the shower for almost a week. She only takes baths now. The degree to which he abused Tippi Hedren during that scene from The Birds is, whoa. He literally threw birds at her for 5 days, 8 hours a day, so that they would pee off and actually attacked her, even after her doctor told him she couldn't take any more. She still has scars. not to mention the sexual assault and the threats to ruin her career if she didn't comply. He sent her daughter, Melanie Griffith, a really lifelike doll of her mother, dead in a coffin. She was 8. Dude was fricked. Behind the Bastards does a great couple episodes about him. Those are just the ones I remember off the top of my head from 2+ hours of it. As long as I never see Steve Irwin, Mr. Rogers, or Bob Ross in one of these threads, we're good. I once read an article that Steve Irwin wasn't nice to a restaurant waiter. I have zero respect for people who treat waitstaff terribly. It turned out to be someone harassing him at a cafe for an autograph and photo, and didn't like him declining because he was with his family. I never understand people approaching famous people when they're with their families, especially when they have their young children with them. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.